Margaret Wilson had always believed in the sanctity of marriage. At 58 years old, she had raised 3 beautiful children, built a comfortable home in suburban Connecticut, and stood by her husband Daniel through 32 years of what she thought was a solid partnership. Their youngest daughter, Vanessa, had recently married Marcus, a kind-hearted architect with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Margaret adored her son-in-law. He treated Vanessa like a queen, and that was all any mother could ask for. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when everything changed. Margaret was sitting at her kitchen table, the autumn sunlight streaming through the lace curtains she had hung 20 years ago. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message from Vanessa. She smiled, expecting photos from the young couple's weekend getaway to the Berkshires. She tapped the notification. An audio message. 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. Margaret pressed play, expecting to hear her daughter's cheerful voice sharing some funny story about their trip. Instead, she heard something that would shatter her world into 1,000 pieces. The voice was Vanessa's. Yes, but the tone was different, intimate, breathy, and the words that followed made Margaret's blood run cold. Daniel, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you, about us, about the way you touched me. I know this is complicated. I know we have to be careful, but when I'm with you, nothing else matters. Marcus is working late again Thursday. Can you come over? I need you. Margaret's hand trembled so violently that she nearly dropped her phone. Daniel, her husband of 32 years, with Vanessa, their daughter. The phone clattered onto the wooden table. Margaret stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. The room seemed to tilt and spin around her. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of terrible mistake. But she knew her daughter's voice. And there was only one Daniel in their lives. Margaret sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Her mind raced through memories, looking for signs she had missed. Daniel's late nights at the office, his sudden interest in fitness, the new cologne, the way he sometimes seemed distracted when she spoke to him, and Vanessa. Sweet Vanessa, who had always been Daddy's little girl. Had that bond twisted into something unspeakable? Margaret's hands moved almost of their own accord. She picked up her phone and listened to the message again, then again. Each time, the words cut deeper, more real, more devastating. By the fifth listen, shock had begun to crystallize into something else. Something harder, something colder, rage. But Margaret Wilson was not a woman who acted on impulse. She had not navigated 3 decades of marriage, raised 3 children, and run a successful catering business by being reckless. She would need a plan, a good one. That evening, Daniel came home at his usual time, 6:30. He kissed Margaret on the cheek, the same perfunctory gesture he had performed thousands of times before. She noticed the cologne now. Something expensive, something she had never bought for him. How was your day? He asked, loosening his tie. Margaret stirred the pasta sauce with steady hands. Fine. Quiet. And yours? Oh, you know. Same old meetings. Jenkins is still dragging his feet on the Morris account. The lie rolled off his tongue so easily. Margaret wondered how many lies there had been. How long this had been going on. That's frustrating, she said, her voice perfectly neutral. Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes. They ate in near silence, as had become their habit. Daniel scrolled through his phone between bites. Margaret watched him, this stranger who wore her husband's face. After dinner, Margaret excused herself early. I have a headache. I think I'll turn in. Feel better, Daniel said, barely looking up from the television. In the bedroom, Margaret sat on the edge of the bed she had shared with this man for decades. She opened her phone and listened to the message one more time. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled to her eldest son, James. James had always been the practical one, a lawyer in Boston, sharp as a tack, with a protective streak when it came to his mother. M.O.M. Everything okay? It's kind of late. Margaret's voice was steady. James, honey, I need your help with something. It's important. Can you come down this weekend? The concern in his voice was immediate. Of course. What's wrong? I'd rather explain in person. But James, bring Catherine with you. Catherine was James's wife, a family therapist with a kind heart and a keen understanding of human nature. M.O.M., you're scaring me. I'm fine. I promise. I just need to talk through something. Saturday morning. We'll be there by 10. That night, Margaret barely slept. She lay beside Daniel, this man who had betrayed her in the most unthinkable way, and thought about her life. She had been a good wife, a good mother, She had sacrificed her own dreams when the children were young, putting Daniel's career first. She had moved 3 times for his promotions. She had entertained his colleagues, managed the household, and still found time to build her own small business, and this was how she was repaid. But as the night wore on, Margaret's thoughts turned from her own pain to another victim in this sordid affair. Marcus, who trusted his wife. Marcus, who had welcomed the Wilson family with open arms. Marcus, who had no idea that his marriage was built on a foundation of lies. He deserved to know the truth. They both did, but Margaret was not cruel. She would not simply forward the audio message and let the chips fall where they may. This required careful handling. Lives would be destroyed, but perhaps from the destruction, something better could be built. Saturday morning arrived cold and grey. James and Catherine pulled into the driveway at 10 o'clock sharp. Margaret had sent Daniel out on an invented errand, giving her time alone with her son and daughter-in-law. She made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, and Margaret played the audio message. The colour drained from James's face. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," James whispered. "Oh my God, M.O.M." Catherine reached across the table and gripped Margaret's hand. "I am so sorry." Margaret's eyes were dry. She had cried herself empty in the night since the terrible Tuesday. Now there was only resolve. "I need your help," she said quietly. "I need to do this right, for everyone involved." James was already shaking his head, anger flashing in his eyes. "Right, M.O.M. Dad is having an affair with Vanessa." "With your daughter?" "His daughter. There's no right way to handle this. We need to think." Margaret interrupted gently but firmly. "Marcus deserves to know." "I deserve better than this. But I will not let rage guide me." "That's not who I am." Catherine squeezed her hand. "What do you need from us?" Over the next 2 hours, they formed a plan. Monday morning, Margaret called her daughter. Her voice was warm, betraying nothing. "Vanessa, honey, could you and Marcus come for dinner Sunday? I am making that pot roast you love. And I miss you both." Vanessa hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "Of course, M.O.M. That sounds wonderful." 6 o'clock. Perfect. Next, Margaret called James. "Sunday dinner. Be here at 5:30. And bring your brother." David, the middle child, lived in New York. He was a journalist, and Margaret knew he would need to hear this from her. Not through the family grapevine that week passed in slow motion. Margaret went through the motions of her life with eerie calm. She smiled at Daniel. She ran her business. She met with her attorney privately, a friend who had drawn up her will years ago. "Margaret, are you certain?" the attorney asked, pushing the papers across the desk. "I've never been more certain of anything." Sunday arrived. Margaret spent the day cooking. The pot roast, roasted vegetables, fresh rolls, apple pie. All of Vanessa's favorites. It felt important somehow to honor the traditions one last time before everything changed. James and Catherine arrived first, at 5:30 as planned. Then David, looking concerned and confused by the mysterious summons. T 5:45. Margaret pulled James aside. "I need you to record this. Everything. On your phone. Just audio. I don't want there to be any question later about what was said." At 6 o'clock exactly, Vanessa and Marcus arrived. Marcus hugged Margaret warmly. "Something smells amazing." Vanessa kissed her mother's cheek. Her eyes were bright, unsuspecting. Daniel emerged from the study, surprised to see the full family gathered. "What's all this?" "Family dinner," Margaret said simply. Everyone to the dining room. They gathered around the table that had hosted so many holidays, so many celebrations, so many ordinary evenings. The pot roast sat in the center, steaming and fragrant. Margaret remained standing. "Before we eat," she said quietly, "there's something we need to discuss." Daniel frowned. "Margaret, what's this about?" Margaret looked at each of her children in turn, then at Marcus, with his kind, unsuspecting face, then finally at Daniel and Vanessa. "Last Tuesday, I received an audio message. It was meant for someone else, but it came to me instead." Vanessa went very still. The color began to drain from her face. "The message," Margaret continued, her voice steady, "was from my daughter Vanessa. It was meant for my husband Daniel. It was explicit in nature and made clear that the two of them have been having an affair." The room exploded. Marcus stood so abruptly, his chair fell backward. "What?" David's voice cut through the chaos. "This is insane. There has to be some mistake." But James was watching Vanessa and Daniel, and the truth was written on both their faces. Guilt, panic, and underneath it all, a terrible resignation. "It's not true." Vanessa said, but her voice was weak. I don't know what you think you heard, but stop. Margaret's voice was gentle but implacable. Just stop, Vanessa. I've listened to that message 20 times. I know your voice. I know what you said. Marcus had turned to his wife, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. Vanessa, tell me this isn't true. Tell me. Tears were streaming down Vanessa's face now. Her hands shook. Daniel finally spoke. Margaret, please. Can we discuss this privately? No, Margaret's voice was firm. Everyone here has been affected by what you've done. Marcus deserves to know the truth. Your sons deserve to know who their father really is. How long? Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. How long has this been going on? Vanessa couldn't meet his eyes. 6 months, she whispered. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stumbled backward. Catching himself on the sideboard, James had turned to his father, disgust and fury warring on his face. She's your daughter. How could you? Daniel's face had gone grey. It happened. We didn't mean for it to. You didn't mean for it. David's voice was rising. You don't accidentally have an affair with your own daughter. Catherine stood and moved to Marcus's side, providing silent support as the man tried to process the destruction of his marriage. Margaret watched it all with a strange calm. The storm she had anticipated was here, breaking around her, and she stood at its center and moved. I'm leaving you, Daniel, she said quietly. The room fell silent. I've already filed for divorce. The papers are being served tomorrow. I've had 32 years to get to know you, and I thought I did. But the man I married wouldn't have done this. So either you've changed, or I never knew you at all. Either way, we're done. She turned to Vanessa. The disappointment in her eyes was worse than any anger could have been. As for you, Vanessa, you're my daughter, and I will always love you. But I don't know if I can forgive you. Not now, maybe not ever. You've betrayed your husband, your marriage vows, and your family. More than that, you've betrayed yourself and the woman I raised you to be. Vanessa was sobbing openly now. Please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. It was like I was someone else. Please don't hate me. Margaret's voice softened slightly. I don't hate you, but I cannot have you in my life right now. You and your father have made your choices. Now you'll live with the consequences. She turned to Marcus. I am so deeply sorry. You deserved better than this. You deserved honesty and faithfulness. I hope you can find healing. Marcus nodded, unable to speak, tears running down his face. Margaret looked around the table one last time. Dinner is served if anyone wants it. But I think this gathering is over. The weeks that followed were painful and messy. Daniel moved into a hotel that very night. Vanessa called repeatedly, but Margaret didn't answer. Marcus filed for divorce within a week. The family rallied around him and around Margaret. The scandal rippled through their community. Margaret held her head high, refusing to be ashamed of something that wasn't her fault. 3 months later, the divorce was final. Margaret stood in her attorney's office, signing the final papers. Daniel had settled generously, perhaps out of guilt. The house was hers, half of everything else. She would be comfortable, but more than that. She would be free. 6 months after that terrible Sunday, Margaret sold the house in Connecticut. Too many memories, both good and bad. She bought a small cottage in coastal Maine, something she had always dreamed of but never pursued because Daniel preferred the suburbs. James and David helped her move. Catherine came too, and they spent a weekend unpacking boxes and making the cottage feel like home. On the last evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the water. Are you happy, Mom? James asked quietly. Margaret considered the question. I'm not unhappy, she said finally. I'm at peace. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Have you heard from Vanessa? Catherine asked gently. Margaret nodded. She writes, I read the letters. I'm not ready to respond yet. Maybe someday. And Dad, your father made his choice. He chose to throw away everything we built for something shallow and destructive. That's something he'll have to live with. As for me, I'm done looking backward. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Margaret smiled. I'm 60 years old. I spent 32 of those years in a marriage that turned out to be built on sand. But I have decades left, and I intend to make them count. David raised his coffee mug. To new beginnings. They all clinked their mugs together, and Margaret felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite happiness, not yet, but hope, and hope, she was discovering, was more than enough. 2 years later, Margaret stood in the same spot on her porch, watching another sunset. She had built a life she loved. Her catering business had evolved into a small CAF in town. She had made friends. She volunteered at the local library. Her phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hi, Margaret. Is this a good time?" They had stayed in touch, two people bound by shared heartbreak and mutual respect. Always. "How are you?" "Good. Really good, actually. I'm seeing someone. Her name is Rachel." "I wanted you to hear it from me." Margaret's smile was genuine. "That's wonderful, Marcus. I'm so happy for you." They talked for a while longer, sharing updates and stories. After they hung up, Margaret thought about forgiveness. She had forgiven Marcus his association with her family scandal, though he bore no guilt. She had forgiven James and David for their anger, which had sometimes spilled over into her space when they really just wanted to protect her. She had even begun to forgive herself for not seeing the signs sooner. But Vanessa and Daniel, that was harder. Another month passed. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, almost 3 years to the day since that terrible Tuesday, Margaret finally opened one of Vanessa's letters. The words on the page were raw and honest. Vanessa had been in therapy. She had confronted her own destructive patterns. She didn't make excuses, but she tried to explain, and she apologized. Over and over, Margaret read the letter 3 times, then she picked up her phone and typed a message. "I'm not ready for a relationship yet, but I'm willing to try coffee once, and we'll see." The response came almost immediately. "Thank you, MOM. Thank you so much. I'll be there whenever you're ready." Margaret set down her phone and looked out at the ocean. Forgiveness, she was learning, wasn't a single act. It was a process, a journey, and she was finally ready to take the first step, not for Vanessa's sake, not even for her own healing, though that mattered, but because holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Margaret Wilson had spent 60 years learning how to be kind, but she was still learning how to be kind to herself. And that, she thought, watching the waves roll in and out with their eternal patience, was the most important lesson of all.